Can see through you, see your true color.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun.
I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4Ks. And I hope to have two videos out to you today, but I got to get this first one out because it's interesting. You know, I was watching the interview that the G's did last night with the interview room, and you know, as much frustration as I have with them on the Brian Kohberger is the assailant, and it's only Brian Kohberger narrative that they push. I do realize that, I mean, they're victims in this, and they have no real information being brought to them. I noticed at one point in that interview, he was asking McDonough, do we know who even those other buccal swabs were from? And then he made the mention that I think they didn't investigate, you know, some enough. Lets me know that he doesn't really believe the things that he says in a lot of cases as it relates to Brian Kohberger, but it also lets me know that he has no legitimate source of information to tell him anything. I mean, we've already identified everybody almost in those buccal swabs that law enforcement collected. We've got them logged. I can go through and fill in almost every blank of every page of this unsealed report. I mean, just about every single blank with precise accuracy on everything that I'm seeing going forward. And what I want to do in this one, though, is I'm going to show you something that I think is really weird. And it was one of the first real suspects that they had in the case. And the circumstances around that and how they were really putting some time and effort into this guy before they eliminated him as a suspect. But not only that, when this information actually came to light in the public around the time, not too far before the trial was set to start, and it created a little bit of a media storm. And it's kind of weird to me how this entire situation around this subject has gone. And you'll understand what I'm saying by the end of this. So we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, so here, so everybody knows what they're looking at right here. When you go through the chain of custody reports of evidence arriving at the ISP forensic lab there in Meridian, see these ISP forensic services, this is their little lab stamp. And these are evidence submission receipts. And you'll see that it's receipted in on 11/16/22 by Sharon Arredondo. If you watch the video that I've been doing where I go through and I tell you about all the different people in the lab and what their responsibilities are, Sharon Arredondo is universally the one that is accepting evidence into the lab. And then Mickey Hall is another person that's involved in like placing evidence in storage lockers and transferring evidence. And then you get down to Candy Floria, and she's involved basically in moving evidence around and sending evidence back off to the submitting agency. But these are actually receipts, evidence submission receipts, 11/16/22. This one, the first one they have listed here is for the K-bar sheath. So this is the actual evidence submission receipt. Sharon Arredondo receipts it in. And it can really tell you how their investigation was progressing here as you go through this. We go to the next receipt on November the 18th. And what they're submitting into evidence that they're saying that they received, look, you got 1.1, which is the swab of the front strap of the sheath. And going through the chain of custody and the reports that we've gone through, this lines up exactly right on the 18th. Again, Sharon Arredondo. She's in charge of logging this stuff in. And then you got the blood swab collected. This was an extract from the blood swab collected inside Xana's door. This is the blood swab from inside of Maddie's door. This is a blood card from the autopsy of Ethan to make his DNA sample. This is Ethan's right and left nail clippings. Xana's DNA card, her right and left nail clippings. Maddie's DNA card, her right and left nail clippings. Kaylee's DNA card, her right and left nail clippings. This is 2 buccal swabs from Jack Decor. DNA swabs from Bethany and Dylan. Then on 11/21, we've got more evidence that they're logging in. And these are blood swabs from above the stairwell in the residence, the upper floor banister. Now, these are the swabs that they're logging in, not the actual, samples. That's where you get into, you'll see extracts. So first you'll have swabs, then you have extracts. Major crime prints for the victims. DNA swabs of the handprints on the wall outside the south kitchen. Stains from floor 1 and 2. Swabs of the top edge of the half wall. Latent fingerprints. Then on 11/22, Sharon Arredondo logs in these 2. These are cigarette butts found of entryway stair next to where subject right foot was. These are not cigarette butts found in the King Road residence. These are cigarette butts that were found from a stakeout of Jose Cruz. And this is something I'm going to hit hard in this one, because the hypocrisy of what went on throughout this investigation and throughout our coverage of the case, and when certain things were released to the public, is very suspect. And you'll know what I'm talking about by the end of this video. Now, listening to that moron, Chris McDonough, he wants to talk about this particular cigarette butt, and he starts referring to December 6th when Talbot, who was back at the crime scene collecting more evidence, collected this cigarette butt from the yard on the south side behind the sofa, because he, with all of his 30 years of investigating homicides, this is his interpretation of the evidence. And I question every case he's ever prosecuted now. But here's what really happened. All right, so then when we go to this police report and the ISP report, supplement number 104, it talks about on November 21st, Detective Adams of the ISP, along with other detectives, conducted surveillance at an apartment complex in Pullman, Washington. They ultimately seized 2 discarded cigarette butts from a male suspected to be Jose Cruz. And his date of birth is 1981 at the steps leading to the entrance of the apartment building. And it was such a big deal to them at the time that Detectives Herman of the Idaho State Police, Heinel, Walker, Idaho State Police Sergeant Stinnett, all of these guys conducted surveillance of a residence. Their ISP, Idaho State Police guys, surveilling a residence in Pullman, Washington, in a whole nother state, 4 of them. So they were pretty, hard on this guy. They were thinking that this guy could have been, one of the unalivers. And they had good reason to believe that, as I'll show you, even though it turned out to be a nothing burger. But he noticed that he was smoking cigarettes, and he was facing the steps at the entrance of the building. He observed him put out a cigarette between his feet and then smoking a second cigarette. When he's done, he put that cigarette out between his feet. I could see 2 cigarette butts between his feet. Moments later, he stood up, went back inside. After he got up, the cigarette butts were not in the location where I saw him leave. And then he goes on to talk about all this, and finally he collects cigarette butts, item number 252 and 253. Then When we go to Rosinski's report in the Moscow PD docs on 11/22, it talks about Adams bringing him those 2 cigarette butts that he logged into evidence, item 252 and 253. Now, when we go back to this and we start looking at these cigarette butts, they were found on the bottom entryway stair next to where the subject's right foot was. Found in the right corner walkway where it meets the bottom stairs. They're talking about the same cigarette butts. 252 and 253 logged as lab items number 33 and 34. And they all belong to Jose Cruz. Now, why was Jose Cruz such a strong suspect for them at this time? Now, why is that so important? Because when you look at and see who Jose Cruz was, he is a familiar person in this case to a lot of people because it came out a few months ago about Jose Cruz. And people just haven't put 2 and 2 together. Unsolved home invasion mirrors Idaho student unalivings just miles away in Washington State. Pullman, Washington case involved masked intruder with knife attacking sleeping victim in basement bedroom. Folks, they were investigating this guy for the actual unalivings in Moscow the first 10 days of the investigation. And everybody thought, wow, why wouldn't they even look at this guy? This is the first guy they looked at seriously. But we don't learn about it until this article. Washington police have released documents describing an unsolved home invasion involving an intruder with a knife and ski mask just a few miles from the Idaho student murders crime scene. The victim said she was asleep in her bedroom in the basement when she awoke to bedroom doors being opened. According to Washington police report obtained through public records, she said she saw a person enter the room and approach her bed. The person was wearing a full-face burgundy ski mask and was holding a knife in their right hand. She was unable to tell if the intruder was male or female, but they raised the knife, she told a responding officer. Now, this is not something that happens in Pullman. The officer told them later, about 18 years ago, we had some situations like this, but this is very unusual for Pullman. The following fall, a mass murder with eerily similar details would rock the community. Pullman Police Department reopened the case after Brian Kohberger's arrest for the Idaho student murders in December of 2022. More than a year after the incident, but it remains unsolved. It had been reported previously, but following Kohberger's sentencing and the end of the gag order, police files have been released to the public. They've opened the case after nearly a year. No, folks, this was their first suspect in the case, and it's just now coming out, and I'm the only person that could even look in this stuff and follow it. Have you heard anybody else talk about Cigarette Guy and Jose Cruz? No, because if it's not mainstream morons trying to paint Brian Kohberger for something, it's not getting reported on. And if it's not clickbaiters and it doesn't have anything to do with frat nonsense, they're not going to report on it. But I'm going to bring you the truth and everything in this case. Now, Fox News was nice enough to attach case files in that case. And it says that on October the 11th, October the 11th, 2021, I spoke with the girl and her mother by phone about the status of the case. They had concerns that the downstairs neighbor could look into her room while he smoked outside. She had not ever caught him watching her, but noted he could easily see in where he stands and smokes. They also asked questions about home security systems and cameras. I provided the contact information to ATVP. Now, why would Moscow PD be all over this guy initially? Well, look right here. He stands outside and he smokes as he peers into their house. What did they find by the sofa outside the youngster's place? A cigarette butt. So everything lines up with this guy's modus operandi. And then it says at about 1100 hours, I went to Ash Street, went to the lower unit occupied by the neighbor. I contacted a male there who identified himself to me with a Washington ID card as Jose Anibal Cruz. He had a strong Spanish accent and said he didn't speak English well. And there was a language barrier, but I was unable to communicate. And then it goes on to talk about how I went upstairs and spoke with one of the roommates. She showed me the person's room and the location that Cruz smoked outside. She explained that Cruz used to smoke in front of his door, but they asked him to move so the smoke didn't enter their apartment. He then moved around to the side of the house on the grass near the person's bedroom to smoke. She said he didn't speak much or other than to say hello. So these girls didn't want him smoking outside the front door. They asked him to smoke somewhere else. So he went over and started smoking and staring in their windows. And that led to him, I guess, breaking into their house with a knife. Later, I checked Cruz's name. I noted that in May of 2017, Cruz was suspected of entering a neighbor's residence and watching her sleep. And then they've got a case number for more details. So Cruz obviously is the one that went in these youngsters' apartments here back in 2021. They check his record, and he's done it before in 2017. They know he's responsible for that crime. They suspect he's responsible for the unalivings in Moscow. So they investigate him hard. When they finally rule him out as a suspect, though, that's where this stuff gets egregious. Because they know that Jose Anibal Cruz was the assailant in that incident. Yet, on January 10th, Commandeer Brashears directed me to follow up on a lead for this investigation. On 12/30, Kohberger had been arrested for 4 counts of murder in the first degree and burglary for an incident that occurred on 11/13 in Moscow. An affidavit filed with Latah County District Court by Brett Payne noted their investigation concluded. Kohberger had entered a residence in Idaho wearing a mask, killed 3 college-age women and 1 college-age male using a knife. The affidavit noted that Kohberger had begun attending Washington State University in the fall of 2022. So that prompted them to go in and look and see if Kohberger could have been the assailant in Jose Anibal Cruz's incident. Knowing that Kohberger didn't live there at the time, wasn't in the area at the time, and they already knew that Jose Anibal Cruz was the assailant in that incident, and they investigated Jose Cruz in the unalivings in Moscow. And then all this stuff was leaked several months before the trial. What is going on here? And why isn't anybody else covering this crap? Now here's little No Way Jose, little perv that wants to break in on college kids with ski masks on, holding kitchen knives and watch them sleep. So yeah, maybe this guy should be underneath the jail somewhere, but he's not the assailant in the Moscow unalivings. But why hasn't anybody else brought out why they were investigating this guy instead of just the Kohberger crap? And I'll tell you why nobody wants to cover it. And it's different reasons from each group, right? Mainstream morons don't want to cover it because they get information fed to them on what to cover and what not to cover. And I'll tell you exactly why in a minute why they wouldn't want to cover this. Clickbaiters, like I said, if it doesn't have Jack D and the frat nonsense or Adams and all that kind of junk, then their brain can't get around not covering it. So they'll never cover anything of merit. But when you get into the real reasons why these things aren't covered by especially people that do have the brain power to go through and dig out evidence, it's very clear to me from looking at the new released forensic reports. You see, by the time that they were investigating hard on Jose Cruz right here, they had a little bit of inside knowledge. Yeah, the inside knowledge that they had was at least one of their perpetrators wasn't a white guy. Oh yeah, at least one of their perpetrators wasn't a white guy, and they knew it. Now, I don't think that they knew if it was a Hispanic individual, an African American, or a Native American, or somebody of Oriental descent, a Mongolian, or whatever you want to say. So they knew it wasn't a white guy, though, because of the DNA that they collected from the victim's fingernails and the likelihood ratios that they ran that told them one of the assailants wasn't a white guy. We'll cover that next. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, your thoughts, your criticisms, and until next time, Pavarotti's out.
To dream, believe you are the strength